Okay.
Did anyone hear the shrieks of my children upstairs? Like just checking in.
Luckily, no.
I don't hear
personally.
Like a plastic trumpet blaring. No, nothing on your end. Cool.
Perfect.
Chill.
It's everyone's weekend.
Good.
Lovely. So excited to chat with everyone here.
Yeah, I'm excited I've chatted with some of like my, favorite Jews in publishing, but not like collected all at once. So
Yeah. Always good. Always fun to gather at GatherDC.
Yeah, I love this event. I think it's just such a cool topic, and I don't know, I'm excited that like there's a whole community of people to talk about like Judaism
For sure
together.
Yeah. Excited. Like I remember, Sacha, when we did the your book launch event in Boston, and I got really, really excited finding out that you had like a childhood obsession with like the triangle shirtwaist like factory, which is like maybe a morbid thing to be obsessed with or whatever, but just being like, oh, another me, like this.
I feel like it's like either the Titanic or the triangle shirtwaist factory fire for children.
I had both.
Okay, and that's so iconic. For me, it was definitely the Titanic. And then in like historical wise, I feel like there's like, it could be like Rome, Egypt, Greece. Like people have, like, I don't know. I love hearing about
someone had some hyperfixation of like a historical tragedy that they were nursing throughout their youth, for sure. Or several.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here. It's an amazing group, an amazing collection of people. And thank you to our audience who are joining us tonight. I think we can go ahead and start. So I'm Marianne. I'm the store manager at City Bookshop, a woman-owned, community-focused independent bookstore in Washington, D.C. And we are so excited to be here tonight with our wonderful authors and GatherDC. Before we get started, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. We'll have time for questions at the end of tonight's conversation. So if there's a question that you'd like to ask, please just put that in the Q&A box at any point so we can easily see it. And feel free to use the chat for general enthusiasm. You can tell us where you're tuning in from. You can tell us what your favorite Jewish fantasy book is. You can tell us what your historical childhood obsession was. We'd love to hear it. Tonight, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat. My colleague Emma is monitoring the chat and can help as necessary. And of course, if you need to purchase a book by any of the authors this evening or any other books that come up, you can shop on our website, and we do ship anywhere in the country. Tonight, we are also partnering with GatherDC, a local Jewish organization, and I would like to hand things over to Alexandra to tell you about the work they do.
Thank you so much, Marianne. I'm Alexandra Terrell. I'm the managing director of GatherDC. I just want to thank City Books so much for thinking of us and deciding to partner and collaborate on this event. I really, really appreciate the space in which to spotlight authors from Jewish backgrounds who bring Judaism into their work. I think this is going to be a really rich dialogue. Like Marianne said, we are a hyper-local organization. We work here in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area, and we specifically work with Jews in their 20s and 30s. And we exist to help you connect to other young people, to connect to the Jewish local ecosystem, to things happening all around us. We are very lucky in that we live in an incredibly rich and diverse and deep Jewish community where there's just so much happening. And I hear that it can be really, really hard to find your people and your place. And so we really do the work of, I like to say, instead of like spaghetti on the wall, it's like dart to dartboard. We have a whole team of people here who are ready to help you find your place in Jewish community. And a big piece of our work is also helping you to develop a really meaningful adult Jewish identity. We think it's really, really important for each individual to have a compelling and lasting relationship with their Judaism. And we're really here to help you find what feels authentic to you. So we have a whole team of individuals Their job is to meet you, to learn about your Jewish journey, your hopes and dreams, what you're interested in, what you're not interested in. And through that relationship building, we're able to help find people and places that can really speak to your authentic Jewish identity. We also have a rabbi on staff, and that person is really available for anything related to what you need. As I know, sometimes it can be hard to get in touch with a rabbi, and the whole purpose of the Gather Rabbi is to have someone who's really easily accessible for whether that's pastoral care, whether it's education, whether it's talking about a big life moment. We have someone you can get in touch with and talk to pretty immediately. And we also host classes. We host fellowships and summer retreats and all sorts of interesting and dynamic ways to get in touch with, again, that like authentic Judaism that you might be searching for. So I'm going to put in the chat our website, and I'm also going to put into the chat a spot where you can sign up to get in touch with us. We'd love to take you to coffee if you're in the DC area. It's our treat. Thank you so much. Again, City Books has raised over $100 for GatherDC tonight. That's incredible. That is going to help us reach like many people. And we really, really love this work. And I think this event really embodies something that Gather stands for, which is finding Judaism in any place in your life is incredibly meaningful and incredibly authentic. And I just really appreciate all of these authors who have found that connection for themselves within their passion and within their professions as well. So thank you so much for having us. Please get in touch with me if you have any questions. And Marianne, I'm going to pass it back to you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. We're so happy that you could be here tonight. So the rest of our evening will be between these wonderful authors all writing Jewish books and Jewish fantasy. So we have with us Sacha Lamb, a 2018 Lambda Literary Fellow in Young Adult Fiction, who graduated in Library and Information Science and History from Simmons University. Sacha lives in New England with a miniature dachshund mix named Ansu Bean. And their debut novel, When the Angels Left the Old Country, was named a Prince Honor Book, a Sidney Taylor Award winner, and a Stonewall Book Award winner. We're also joined by Rebecca Podos, whose debut novel, The Mystery of Hollow Places, was a Junior Library Guild selection and a Barnes & Noble Best YA Book of 2016. Her second book, Like Water, won the 2018 Lambda Literary Award for LGBTQ Children's and Young Adult. Her latest releases are Fools in Love, a co-edited YA anthology with Ashley Herring Blake, and the YA fantasy novel From Dust of Flame. An agent at the Reese Literary Agency in Boston, she can be found on her website, RebeccaPodos.com. We're expecting to be joined by Aden Polydoros, who's been delayed, but is an award-winning author who transitioned from female to male when he was 14. After going stealth for over 10 years, he came out as transgender in order to support trans youth and vocalize how transitioning saved his life. His YA Gothic fantasy novel, The City Beautiful, won the Sidney Taylor Book Award and was a finalist for the Lambda Award, the National Jewish Book Award, the Sybil's Award, the South Carolina Book Award, and the 2022 World Fantasy Award. And moderating tonight is Jake Maia Arlow, a Stonewall Honor author, podcast producer, and bagel connoisseur. They studied evolutionary biology and creative writing, not as different as you might think, at Barnard College, and now live with their girlfriend and loud cat in the Pacific Northwest. So once again, we're so pleased that you're all here this evening, very excited for this conversation, and I will now pass the mic to Jake to take it away.
Yes, I am so excited. Thank you, East City Bookshop, for having us for this chat. And thank you to Alexandra from GatherDC. I'm so pleased to be talking to both of you. And before we really dive into the conversation, I just wanted to give you both a chance to, give a quick pitch of your books so that the people watching who might not be familiar with them will immediately run and buy them from East City Bookshop. Whoever's the spirit moves can go first. Yeah.
No. Here's a copy of the book that I read upstairs 5 minutes before we went on camera because I had gotten it from Dust to Flame, which is a sapphic YA contemporary-ish mostly Jewish fantasy, which does alternate a little bit between Prague on the eve of World War II and the 90s and contemporary day, as it spans throughout Jewish generations, really. That's my book.
Beautiful. And Sacha?
When the angels left the old country, I describe as an Ellis Island era immigrant fairy tale. It stars an angel and a demon who are Talmud study partners, and they leave their little shtetl in search of a girl who's gone missing on her way to America, and they find out that America is a complicated place.
I love that. Thank you both. So both of your books, and I find most Jewish authors, whatever they're writing about, are drawing inspiration from Jewish stories and texts, because Judaism is rife with fantastical stories, creatures, and commentary. So I'm curious from both of you, where did you draw your inspiration from for your own stories? Which texts or rabbis or storytellers? It's a bit self-serving because I'm in the middle of my own research, so I really just want to hear. How about Sacha first, since Rebecca went last time?
Sure. My book draws very heavily on folklore that originates or is at least first recorded in the Talmud itself. So there's things about angels and demons and how they relate to the human world and how they relate to Judaism specifically and to the Jewish community that came from the Talmud. But I do have to credit a rabbi named Ronald Isaacs for picking the pieces of Talmud that had those things in them. And he has written like more books than you can count, but of his books, there is one called Climbing Jacob's Ladder, which is all about angels. And he's got one about miracles. So I've really leaned on his work. They're kind of old. They might even be out of print, but I think a lot of them are easy to find on.
Who was the rabbi again?
Ronald Isaacs.
Okay, I'm writing it down. I'll write it in the chat for everyone.
This is all just like a stealth session to help.
Exactly. No,
actually.
Yeah, for sure.
Is there an
for sure.
audience?
No, because
I don't know.
when you said, because also I had a book, I have, all my stuff here. I have the book Miriam's Tambourine, which I was thinking just briefly, because this author also has a book called Jacob's Ladder. So I was like, oh my gosh, is it the same one?
Yeah. Ascending Jacob's Ladder.
Oh, I love that. Oh,
and his middle initial is H. Ronald H. Isaacs.
I'm writing it in the chat for everyone and not just me. Okay. And now it looks like here we have our final panelists who are so excited about Aden. Can you hear us? Oop, maybe not. That's okay. Once he can, we will come back to him. But Sacha, sorry to interrupt you. Why don't you keep going on that?
Yeah, so I really used Rabbi Isaacs's collection of texts to access the ancient texts. Because the Talmud is very long, it takes about 7 years to read. And I am doing the daily reading, and
that's awesome.
I like coming across the texts that I'm familiar with from other contexts, but I never would have had all of the information that I used for the book if it weren't for people who collected it all by subject the way that this Rabbi Isaacs did. So
that's so great. And now I'll just check one more time. Aden, can you hear us? Okay. Oh, Aden's coming.
In progress.
Sorry.
That's quite all right. Hello, can you hear us, Aden? Ooh, still a bit of an echo. All good.
Yeah, I can hear you, but
here, why don't you mute for a second, Aden, and we will have Rebecca answer, and then maybe if you have headphones, you could potentially grab those, and if not, we can figure something out. Maybe we can all mute when you answer. But Rebecca, why don't you answer with some of the text that you were looking at with your own work?
Yeah, I brought them all down with me because much in the way when someone is like, what have you read lately? You're like, in my life, I've never read a single book.
Exactly.
So just in general, I did also read a lot of like excerpts from like Talmudic passages on like, Shedim. And since that features heavily in the book, I did a lot of research on like Jewish herbalism and like healing magic that kind of like
oh my gosh, I have my Ashkenazi herbalism book right here. Is that one of the ones you're
Ashkenazi
reading?
herbalism? So good, so fascinating, and like
so fascinating.
I genuinely like didn't even know that for some reason originated out of like came out of the Pale Settlement and everything, and it's just cool to like that's where my family came through. A lot of our families came through, so it was just really fascinating to read about. I also did a lot of reading about like Jewish folk tales and stories and fairy tales, because From Dust to Flame is kind of like a book about stories in some way. And so I have an e-copy of Leaves from the Garden of Eden. And then I also have Lilith's Cave.
Oh my God, I have that one right back here too.
Jewish Tales of the Supernatural. We have Radiant Days, Haunted Nights, Great Tales from the Treasury of Yiddish Folk Literature. So a lot of story collections. And then From Dust to Flame, there was a little bit of research into, again, like the Pale, not a ton, because it wasn't specifically set there, but there are stories that originated from there that came up. But for a new project, I'm also using these texts, so I thought I'd bring them down anyway.
Yeah, please do.
We have the Jewish Dark Continent, which is like the collected surveys of like information from traveling the Pale Settlement.
Rebecca, I'm deep in that book. I'm deep in that book right now. It's so interesting.
Amazing. And then photographing the Jewish nation.
Rebecca, we have to talk after this, because you are just pulling out the books that I have been reading at the library.
Yeah, we'll get a chat started after this specifically about this. But yeah, and I had not seen a surplus of like photos from that era, but it's just, and I'm not a person who like pictures things very visually, so having that representation, like, absolutely immeasurably helpful. And then my last thing I'm gonna say, even though it's not something that was like I directly utilized research for, but I did read, A Rainbow Thread, which is an anthology of queer Jewish texts. And it's just a really good read. So those are my
I love that. Thank you both for sharing. And Aden, are you able to hear us speak, be heard? Amazing.
Oh,
yes,
good.
you sound great.
There's no echo this time, it sounds like, because that was awful.
No. Perfect. And thank you for joining us. Sorry about your computer troubles. And since before you got on, don't worry, we introduced you. Everyone's so excited. In fact, my grandmother and mom, who both are huge fans of the City Beautiful, are on here. So you've got at least 2 fans in the audience. But I'll just give you a chance to whichever, ones of your books, or if you want to just describe a little bit about a book, multiple books that you've written that relate to Jewish fantasy. We were just sort of doing like an elevator pitch for Sacha and Rebecca, if you want to do that.
Okay, yeah, of course. I just want to add though, Rebecca, I need the list of books you just shared, because like I need those for my own library. And if anyone has any other recommendations, please send them my way.
I can type them in the chat while you're
we'll get a whole list of resources going.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm Aden Polydoros. I'm the author of The City Beautiful, which is a queer historical fantasy set in 1893 Chicago about Jewish immigrants in Dybbuk. Probably butchering that pronunciation there. And then October, I have another historical horror novel, Wrath Becomes Her, coming out October 10th. It's set during the Holocaust in 1943 in Lithuania. And it's about Vera, a golem created using like a darker form of kashif of like sorcery against the traditional method of creating a golem. And she's created to avenge her maker's murdered daughter, to hunt down the Nazis and collaborators responsible for killing the girl. And after her creator disappears, she goes out in search of him, and also to fulfill her violent purpose. And along the way, she encounters Akiva, a Jewish partisan fighting in the woods outside Vilna, the capital of Lithuania.
I love that. I cannot wait for that. And if you do have like an answer that jumps out at you for the last question we had, which was just about what sort of texts or stories or folklore you did draw on for your own work, feel free to answer. If not, we can skip right ahead to the next question.
Yeah. I did a lot of research regarding the time period. I don't have a list of books, but it's really
No
important for me
worries.
to like do that sort of close research with historical
Yeah.
fiction. So a lot of it was just online research. I mean, there are also a lot of accounts of partisan fighters. I read Defiance, but also there was another guide, an autobiography written by a partisan, which was also very helpful.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. So my next question for all of you, which first of all, thank you for talking about all the text and everything. It looks like we've already, even Sacha has a bookshop.org link for text. Rebecca wrote some in the chat, so that's great. Thank you to both of you. I'm sure that'll be really helpful for our audience members. My next question is that, so a couple of you, Rebecca and Aden, I believe, were on a panel last year where you discussed asked what everyone thought constituted a Jewish fantasy. I think Rebecca asked this question of what to you constitutes a Jewish fantasy. And for you two, I'm curious to hear if your answer has changed since then, or sort of how you've conceptualized that. And for Sacha, I'm just curious to hear, what your answer would be to that question. So if that's jumping out at anyone, feel free.
I can start. Well,
please.
While you think about what you said last year and how things might have changed.
Yeah, I should have pulled up what you said.
My definition of Jewish fantasy, I think, would be broader than it needs to be to encompass my book, because obviously my book is built on a framework of Talmudic folklore. So it was very much built with the thought in mind of having it exist in a universe where a Jewish conception of how things work was the default. But I actually think that what makes something Jewish can be much, much broader than that. And I really liked something that Maggie Tokuda Hall said in a panel that I witnessed that was about the importance of storytelling and how in a secondary world fantasy that is not explicitly Jewish, there can still be Jewish threads because of the author's Jewish identity. And if you're working from a Jewish perspective, and for Maggie in The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea, apparently the focus on storytelling as a form of magic was very important, and there was a Jewish element to that. And I agree with that. I think that something can be Jewish without necessarily anyone noticing until it's pointed out.
I think that's a great answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think my answer has changed all that much from last year. I think I said Jewish fantasy is written by a Jewish person, and a Jewish person is somebody who identifies as Jewish. It can be, the author meaningfully engaging with some aspect of like spirituality, history, tradition, storytelling, culture, whether or not it's named as Jewish on the page. You're talking about like The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reid, or A Far Wilder Magic by Alison Saft. Those are deeply Jewish fantasies to me. It's never named as such in the page, but you can't deny that they engage absolutely meaningfully with that content. So I think that's still my answer. Yeah.
I love that answer. And Aden.
Yeah. For me, I would have to say, I honestly can't recall my answer from earlier last year, but I think, there's room for multiple interpretations of Jewish fantasy, and that, Jewish fantasy that is heavily set in the culture and the history and the religion and folklore of Judaism is so important. Sacha, you brought up a great point about worlds where Judaism and the significance of Jewish practices and beliefs, worlds where that's a driving force, is so important and so interesting because it allows readers then to see Judaism as the default, the way that Christianity or Christian beliefs is often considered the default in media, in that it, gets overlaid over so much of storytelling, even just with the visuals of resurrection or crucifixion in film. But yeah, I mean, like, I know for me, one of the books I'm so excited for is Laura Samatan's the Sins on Their Bones, which is so heavily based on Jewish history in a world that is modeled after Imperial Russia, but where Judaism is the default religion, and it's the that world's sort of reflection of Judaism, similar to A Far Wilder Magic. But also coming from an interfaith family, and I'm so interested in Jewish folklore and culture and history, but I don't have that religious background that other authors do have, and that, in my mind, really adds a sense of authenticity and to the text. And so for me, I think, there's so much room for so many stories where Jewish characters or Jewish coded characters are the default, or even ones where Jewish characters aren't the default, but where it centers Jewish experiences.
I love what you said.
that.
Just really quickly about even like changing the framework of the society in which this fantasy exists, so that it's not like using this like culturally Christian imagery or like philosophies or something, even if it's not specifically Christian. Like, these are just sort of like the default settings in our culture. And something Katie Lack has a book that, they're amazing Jewish fantasy, fantastic. But like, one thing that's like a thread from their feature book is like the Jewish concept of forgiveness, which differs vastly from like the Christian concept of forgiveness. Right. And that's something that I really love and find comforting. I like our forgiveness, but yeah, just like engaging with those ideas and presenting those ideas as like outside of what would be the default in this world that we live in is like an excellent point about Jewish fantasy.
Yeah, I think you did that.
Yeah, and I also just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, even if it's about what we've said now, about, any of this, drop it in the Q&A. We will answer those questions. Don't let yourself forget what you were going to ask. Does anyone have anything else to say on that before we move on to the next question? Because those were great answers. Oh, hello, Kitty. We have a cat. Does your cat have any? Oh, what a sweetie. Oh my gosh.
If I don't entertain him, he'll climb on my keyboard and break it even more.
Totally understood.
Do what you have to do.
Yeah. And so all of you have elements of, history within the Jewish fantasy books or fantasy books that you have written. And this sort of ties into the text, but I'm also curious how you go about your world building or understanding of history when you are, injecting fantasy into it, injecting something that wasn't within that world initially. Is there, what sort of resources were you reading about it? How much did you change what you had read to fit, your narrative? What was your process like for that? I'll call on someone if we're. How about Sacha?
Okay. So I have a history degree, so I always say that I kind of got a lot of research for this book for free, because I had just finished a master's thesis on Jewish immigration to the United States in the early 20th century. So I had a lot of that, and I had read a lot of first person accounts, people's accounts of what it was like coming over here, a lot of memoirs, especially of women. I really like reading memoirs. They give you a great perspective on, you know, it might not be the facts of what happened, but it's what it felt like, that what happened felt like. So I really like reading memoirs to get the feeling. And I was obviously putting things in that didn't happen. There, as far as I know, there weren't any vampire doctors at Ellis Island at any time. But I kind of approached it using the framework of a society where there isn't a clear delineation between natural and supernatural, and people sort of take the supernatural as kind of at face value. So it's almost ordinary to think that, oh yeah, there's demons hanging out in the attic or whatever. There's ghosts that come to the synagogue on Friday night and have their own little service. And in that way, I tried to make it feel very kind of everyday and natural to have the fantastical elements. And to do that, I was just using people's accounts of like, this is what my grandmother would tell me. This is why you couldn't go down that path at night, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I love that, like bringing in the elements of memoirs and firsthand accounts of supernatural into that. That's so cool that you were doing this research in a formal way, and then we're able to bring that into your story. That's really, really cool. Is anyone else feeling it? Yeah, please. Please.
Yeah, I love that so much, just because like I know that there's some debate around the term magical realism, but I feel like by sort of presenting these beliefs as an innate part of the world of the characters' lives, it does deeply reflect the beliefs that people had back then and that some people still have. And it gives, in my mind, a sense of history as well, of, you know, a legacy of these beliefs that continues to affect these characters as it did those who came before them. I know for me, what was really important was like in Wrath Becomes Her, Vera isn't a traditional golem. It's sort of a Frankenstein twist to it, where she is also made with parts of the murdered girl, which gives her memories of that girl's memories, as well as since she was laid out to dry on materials from the Geniza, she also ended up absorbing the memories of the scribes whose writings cover her limbs like tattoos. And I know for me, what was constantly in the back of my head while working on that story, as well as with how do I write a Holocaust story set in Lithuania where there was such devastation, was what am I trying to tell with this story? What biases and preconceived notions are the readers bringing into it? So many Holocaust stories center righteous Gentile characters, or end up centering Jews as who we watch live in hiding or die in concentration camps. And I knew I didn't want that. I didn't want any scene set in a concentration camp. I wanted to, I do have a ghetto scene, but it's very brief because I don't want to spend a scene. I want readers to understand the atrocities committed then. But I also want it to be the kind of not gratuitous, but I want to give Jewish readers the freedom to see themselves as heroes and see characters fighting back the way that American soldiers do in World War II movies, the way that other non-Jewish characters always seem to do, spies, assassins, rebels. I wanted that in Wrath Becomes Her. And so for me, it was just very important to make sure that I did as much research as possible, that I portrayed the various factions in Lithuania at time, from like the auxiliary police to the Nazi officials to the Soviet partisans, and how all people would react with Jewish partisans, and what sort of prejudices would characters would have against the Jewish characters. And yeah, that was just very important to me, since I recognized it's a fantasy novel, it's a horror novel. I should probably do my best to keep it realistic in the setting and in the political situation.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting of, you know, building off from that frame of like, it's sort of within already a structure and a story and a narrative that has been crafted for us, like how to build off of that. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, thanks.
And Rebecca, how about you?
Yeah, so like From Dust to Flames, there's only maybe a couple dozen pages that take place again, like in the past, and sort of the Prague and the right on the eve of, you know, the Nazi invasion of Prague. But I spent so much of my research was specifically dedicated to just those pages. And I don't like Katie Lock, again, like brilliantly, you know, kind of plays with history and fantasy and reality. And oh my gosh, what was their last book that just came out about the Hungarian Revolution?
This Rebel Heart.
This Rebel Heart. I was super precious about any like historical details I could find, like studying just like maps of like Joseph and what it would have looked like then, and like how you turn down what streets to get to this synagogue and how you get to the square. And you know, like kind of super precious about those. I think like when it comes to like stories, those I feel really more comfortable messing with and interrogating. And this book, and actually another one of my books, hinges on like a different version of a popular fairy tale or folk tale in our world. And looking at like why people might have chosen to tell the story that way, and what it might mean if there was this other version that we hadn't heard of, and why that version might have gotten buried or lost or something. So I love playing around with like this sort of like these stories we've inherited, but when it comes to the actual like historical events, I'm incredibly anxious about them, honestly, and just want to get as many like details down as I possibly can, just because I'm a little nervous about that.
And it's so cool that like you were looking at a map and writing from that, like I love that level of specificity. And then also like understanding that stories change depending on who's telling them, whatever you want them to mean, and you're working within that bound. So that's so cool. And now I think because we have this basis from this conversation, I will ask sort of the question that sort of is like an overarching question of the panel, which is that I'm wondering how, you know, doing all this research and writing these Jewish fantasy stories, how has that informed your understanding of your own Jewish identity or any other aspect of your identity, really, that intersects with your Judaism? I can like give you a moment to think as well, or yes, please.
I can go, yeah. It's actually really interesting because I was born in an interfaith family. I'm not religious. I had some early childhood experiences with Judaism. I went to a Jewish preschool, and we celebrated the holidays up until I was probably 8 or 9 when my grandpa died, and it stopped then. But lately, you know, I was working in the City Beautiful. I realized I need to make Altair observant because that would be realistic for the time, and I realized I wanted to make him observant because so many books have not of observant characters moving away from their religion at the end, and that's considered growth or improvement, and I didn't want that. So I know for me, writing Jewish books has allowed me to become much more acquainted with my Judaism and also my family history. It's made me much more interested in researching where my family comes from. Like I learned, you know, some of my ancestors came from Vilna as well. One was a rabbi, and I had no idea. And it's also made me increasingly more interested in the religious practices as well, and the cultural practices in a way that I honestly wasn't expecting, especially these last several months, this last year. So I think for me, I think I probably had some some biases and assumptions that being trans was incompatible with being Jewish, or being observantly Jewish, or going to synagogue, or I know now that's not the case. That's actually making me a lot more interested and reconnecting with the community and sort of finding my place, finding what do I want to do, what do I want to practice, like how do I how do I want to approach being agnostic, or being from an interfaith family with Judaism. And I think that's gonna be something I continue exploring, and just really happy and excited to know that you can be Jewish and be trans, and that's not a problem. That doesn't make you any less of either one. Be Jewish, be queer, it doesn't one doesn't negate the other.
Yeah, I love that. In fact, I would say there's perhaps an overrepresentation of queer and trans people within the Jewish community.
Yeah, I actually,
and even within our history as well.
Yeah, one
and also this panel.
A trans boy I knew when I went to trans groups when I was a young teen, he converted to Judaism recently, which is amazing.
That's awesome.
I think,
That's beautiful. Rebecca, I see you maybe wanting to.
It's because I had kind of like the opposite thing from Aden, which is obviously it was fascinating to like dive into these folktales and fairy tales and like monsters and stuff that I was like familiar with or like aware of growing up, but hadn't like drilled into it like that. But for me, I feel like some of the most interesting research was because I grew up in like an observant family, like a conservative Jewish family. Went to Hebrew school, eventually taught Hebrew school, and I didn't know that I was Jewish, so I was just like, okay, I'm Jewish. In this book, my main character has no idea that she has Jewish heritage until the fantastical things start to happen to her and horrific things when she turns 17. And so I had a character who like had not grown up familiar with traditions, had not grown up with this as like a building block of their identity. And so I had to describe like, again, like practices that I was intimately familiar with, like sitting Shiva and a Havdalah service from the eyes of someone who had never experienced it. And I feel like the most, sort of thought I put in was there was just this one scene where a rabbi like sort of offers an explanation from their perspective, like, okay, now I've discovered that I'm Jewish. Like, what does that mean? Essentially, what does it mean that I'm Jewish or have Jewish heritage? Because she isn't even sure if like she's ready to sort of claim that. And I did like a lot of reading just on like, what does it mean to be Jewish? Because I was just like, I am Jewish. It was not something I considered, and kind of like boil it down to this explanation of like, to be Jewish is to be, like the next chapter in the collected story of our people. And that's like a story that you can write yourself into if you convert, like, that those stories belong to you and you can write the next chapter in them. And then like, sort of Aden was talking about, like, there's plenty of precedents in Judaism for like, non-binary genders. And I belong to this really fantastic synagogue that, has made many public speeches coming out about like the essentially Jewish ethic of like the right to govern one's own body, like in terms of both like abortion rights, in terms of trans rights, and how like that's a deep cornerstone of our religion. But I honestly never had a crisis point where I was like, oh, I'm like queer. What does that mean for me as a Jewish person? I was just like, well, I'm of course, facts. It's a fact that I'm Jewish. Oh, and now also I'm like queer, and also I'm non-binary. And like, oh, so these are just things about me that are true. And I never there was never kind of like a clash of those facets of my identity. They were just true things about me. But it is like really interesting to read about the perspective and explore and consider it from that point of view.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you for that answer, Rebecca. And Sacha, what about you?
Well, as I said earlier, when the angels left the old country is taken from a perspective of matter-of-factness, that the universe works in a Jewish way. It is also taken somewhat matter-of-factly that the universe also works in a queer way. The angel character is genderless and is going through a process of forming an identity as an individual, as opposed to the identity that is imposed upon it by the universe, by the role of being an angel. And its character arc is about figuring out what are the pieces of the identity that I have had that I want to keep, and what are the pieces that I don't want, and what are the things that are not accessible to me as I have been supposed to be, that I do want. So obviously this is a trans narrative. Like, clearly it's an allegory or whatever you want to say, but I wanted to express it very much in terms that I was taking from the Talmudic folklore, as much as possible from things that rabbis have said over thousands of years, to make it very much so that within the universe of this book, queerness and Jewishness are inextricable from each other in a certain way, so that, you know, the wholeness of my identity is all together in one package. And it could be quite polemical, especially because the whole book is about a homoerotic Talmud study relationship between a gay demon and a non-binary angel. But I just presented it very matter-of-factly, and people have accepted it really well. I have not had any kind of negative comments about it. I mean, maybe people who would have negative comments have just chosen not to read it. But you know, I'm going around telling everyone how gay these two rabbis from the Talmud are. So this is a situation that I could be getting into fights with, but so far I haven't gotten into any fights with anyone about it. So that's been really nice. And I hope that other, you know, my young readers will read it and be like, wow, my whole self is in this book and I don't have to cut off any pieces.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Sorry, that's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. I love, just the idea that it's taken as at face value that Judaism and queerness are intertwined in your narrative. I think that's really, really cool. It looks like we have one question so far. I'm not ruling anything out. We might have some more in a minute, but we just have a few more minutes before we wrap up. So I just want to remind people, if you do have questions, leave them in the Q&A. It looks like this one's a pretty specific question, so we might not have an answer, but we could, noodle around on it. Caitlin Adams asks a specific question, but where have the panelists seen the Jewish concept of forgiveness, kindness, love, etc., as opposed to the Christian ones represented in the books they have read? So if there are any, I know you were talking about Katie Locke and the example of their book. If there's other examples of that you can think of. I feel like, it is very much in Jewish fantasy. I feel like when I am reading those stories, it does feel like that is represented, but I can't off the top of my head think of something.
Like the first one that comes to mind for me, weirdly, is Steven Universe, and the way that Steven goes around talking villains out of being villainous and talking them around to doing better. And to me, that's very Jewish. That's how a lot of rabbis go around exorcising demons, is they go over to someone who's possessed by a demon and they're like, hey, why are you acting like this? What can we do for you? Do you need us to say Kaddish for you or something like that? And that's my very kind of nerdy academic take on Steven Universe. But I do think Steven Universe is very Jewish in that way.
I love reading maybe non-Jewish or texts that you wouldn't assume are Jewish texts as Jewish texts. I think that's so fun and so cool. We have a couple more questions in case if people don't have another answer for that. We have more questions we can answer, but potentially we can keep noodling on that while we answer another question, unless either of you have something that jumps out at you. No. Okay. Oh, you do. Great.
Yeah. I know for me, that's actually a topic I approached in Wrath Becomes Her, because I didn't want to do a narrative where the Nazis are forgiven, or where the people who have done terrible things say they're sorry and they're forgiven. I think, you know, the idea of forgiveness that's presented in most media puts the responsibility of providing forgiveness on the victim, and that's never something that sat right with me. I think, you know, it suggests like if you don't forgive someone, there's something wrong with you. All that pain you're feeling is on you because you weren't able to extend forgiveness to this person. So I know for me, I tried to approach the idea of forgiveness and retribution from a more Jewish perspective in Wrath Becomes Her.
I love that. And Rebecca, did you also, I saw you were.
I just feel like the concept of forgiveness, even if it's not like a prominent thread in my books, like does operate just on the principle of Jewish forgiveness. And like, you know, there's a big part of my books that are about like recognizing that your parents are people, for instance, and like making space, like allowing for the fact that they are people. But yeah, I think at no point would I ever have it be like, well, you've got to forgive them, they're your family, or like it's holy to forgive. No, it's not.
We have a question here, and maybe we could do like a rapid fire type thing. Shout out a word that comes to you, a phrase. The question is, what about writing fantasy do you feel fits well with writing Jewish books? Which I feel like we have touched on, but I think, you know, as a specific question, very interesting. Maybe it's not a rapid fire question.
I mean, fantasy is such an incredible tool for, you know, sifting through and exploring, again, like those combinations of like culture, stories, traditions, religion, spirituality, and like all of that is Judaism. Like, though it's not just, you know, like the religious element or any specific thing, but like all of this, again, like the greater like inheritance of Judaism is all of those things, and that lends itself really well to like exploration through fantasy books.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I think just the freedom to explore fantasy through a Jewish lens is very liberating, since I grew up reading mostly non-Jew, I'd say almost exclusively non-Jewish fantasy.
Yeah, I love that. And Sacha, or
yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's a degree to which Jews have been forced by living next to Christianity for a long time into the role of kind of being the counterfactual. And sometimes that really sucks for us. But sometimes it also gives a perspective of like, well, here is the broad narrative that everyone is saying is true, but we're looking at it from another angle. I don't know. I like looking at things from off-kilter angles and finding a new perspective. And I don't know. I feel like both fantasy and rejecting a Christian hegemonic perspective have those things that have that in common.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Okay. And this is a great ending question, I think, because it's for other recommendations. The question is, what are your favorite Jewish fantasy novels? This one we could do rapid fire, I think.
Other than people on this panel.
all of yours.
Because these are some of my favorites, but also Gabriel Savitz's The Way Back.
Yes.
It's set in a shtetl, lots of demons. There's Lilith in it. It's really good.
Great.
I'm just so stoked for The Sins on Their Bones by Laura Smotin to come out, because I adore that book. I critiqued it as I'm her critique partner, and just like, God, I love that book because I think it sort of gives us the opportunity to live in like the kind of aristocracy and, you know, court intrigue setting that we don't normally get. And so I'm just so excited, and it's queer.
And can you repeat the title one more time so we can type it out in the chat? Or you'll write it in the chat. Great. Okay.
I'm excited.
I'll actually get the link.
Yeah.
Ooh, and Rebecca.
I have to again shout out the Kitty Lads title that I forgot the first time around and can't remember this time either, which is so
Rebel Heart, right?
This Rebel Heart.
This Rebel Heart.
This Rebel Heart is just like absolutely beautiful blending of, again, like fantasy and history, like deeply queer, and just like, because it is historical and it is about, it's the Hungarian Revolution, and it's not an alternate, I mean, it ends how it ends. But something that I think is really deeply meaningful in like both Jewish culture and just like to remember in general is that like, just because a revolution ends doesn't mean it fails, or doesn't mean it didn't, like just because a story ends doesn't mean it didn't matter. And that it's not going to matter in the future. And like that the seeds you plant, even if you don't live or, live to see them fruit, like they carry on and they continue to grow. And again, I think that's a wholly Jewish sort of ethic. So can't recommend that enough.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much for this conversation. This has been so lovely, everyone. Oh, and we're gonna get an official outro here from Marianne.
Thank you, Jake.
Oh yeah,
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, we're not getting an
Thank
official
you.
outro, are we? Oh wait, we are. Marianne, you're muted.
Yes, now you get the official outro. But yes, thank you so much to Jake for moderating. Thank you so much to Sacha and Rebecca and Aden for being here tonight. It's been such a great conversation. Just a reminder that if you enjoyed this event, if your interest is piqued about any of the books mentioned tonight, you can order them through our website, eastcitybookshop.com, or if you're using bookshop.org, you can also order through our bookshop link, and we can happily ship books to you if you're not local. You can also check our website for upcoming events, including in-store and hybrid events, virtual events, Instagram lives. We had a recent conversation with Maia Arlow, who wrote Aviva and the Dybbuk, that you can check out. You can also see book clubs we have there. And if you would like to donate to GatherDC, you can also do so at gatherdc.org/donate. This has been so wonderful. What a great collection of people to have here tonight. And I'm so excited to go read more Jewish fantasy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Have a good
everyone.
night.
Have a good
Thank
one.
you.